I'm Zim, and this is the Helpful Photographer Podcast in collaboration with New York City Photo Safari. To register for a safari, please visit newyorkcityphotosafari.com. Today, Allison Precious is back on the podcast so we can continue to talk about bird photography. But we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of camera settings and technique. Allison is a photographer based in Gravesend, England, and she's been shooting birds for over a decade. She's also a member in good standing with the Royal Photographic Society. Hey Allison, thanks for coming back to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Sim.
So I hear it's still pretty gray and nasty over there.
Yeah, it's wet, dull and dismal.
Oh, so sorry to hear that, but, onwards, right? So for the last two podcasts, we've been talking about setting up for your shot, what you need to know before you go outside, and all that good stuff. Today, I want to talk about actual camera settings. One of the things that caught my attention last time was that you said that you like to shoot at about 200 millimeters on a full-frame sensor. And that really surprised me because it felt like a really short lens for this type of photography. Can you go over again why you're shooting so short?
Because I can get closer to the birds, it's less bulky and easier to get in really close to get the good pictures. You're more likely to get a much better intimate picture the closer you are. That's why I like using the 200.
So it sounds a lot like photographing people. I mean, oftentimes you want to shoot at about 100 millimeters or more, but actually if you're shooting a shorter lens, it allows you to be more intimate with the subject. It feels like you're heading in that direction in that you're trying to get a little bit more intimate with your subject as well.
Yeah, you need to be patient. You're there, you're ready. So, patience just to get that good shot with the 200. Obviously the closer you are, the better the picture.
Okay, so what about your settings? Are you shooting manual or auto or shutter priority?
I'm using manual mode.
So what's your f-stop and shutter speed when you're doing that?
My f-stop is usually 5.6 or lower, and my shutter speed, the minimum I go is 1250, and the largest I go is about 1600.
Okay, so your shutter speed is only between 1 over 1250 and 1 over 1600. That seems really slow to me. I would have assumed that you would be shooting something like 1 over 5000. Are you popping up your shutter speed at all if they're in flight?
No, I'll go up to about 1600, and normally when they're in flight, it's sufficient.
That's really interesting because it's not nearly as fast as I would have imagined. What about your f-stop? Why are you shooting such a low f-stop?
Because the bird is the subject, I like to try and blur out the background so the bird really pops and I get, really good detail on the bird itself. I don't want too much background.
Again, that's really interesting. I would have been a little bit concerned with trying to nail the focus, and I would have assumed that by shooting so shallow, this would make things a little bit harder. I would have gone to a higher f-stop just to get myself a little bit of wiggle room on that focus. But as I think it through, when you're shooting 200 millimeters and you're so close to the subject, it's not necessary to be shooting at high f-stops.
No. I prefer the lower.
So what about your ISO settings?
Usually when I'm shooting birds, I have it set at automatic. But depending on the light conditions, I might go and set the minimum and the maximum, probably the maximum around about 800, minimum 100.
Basically what I'm hearing from you is that you're setting your shutter speed reasonably high to make sure that you stop any motion. You've got your f-stop reasonably shallow so that you can drop out the background, but because you're likely to have varying lighting conditions as the bird moves around, you're setting your ISO to auto so that the camera will adjust for any changes you might encounter.
That's right, yeah.
I'm curious, what metering mode are you using?
I use matrix metering, and I find that works fine for what I'm doing.
So you're not spot metering at all?
No.
I understand that you own a Sony 7R Mark III, but you're not using that for any of your bird photography. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
I'm curious, why not?
I can't really nail the focus with it, and I've been trying, and I just have a lot more luck with the Canon.
Which Canon do you shoot with?
The 1DX Mark III.
And you find a lot more success nailing the focus with that than the Sony?
Yeah, much better, yeah.
That's interesting. So my next question is, what drive mode are you in?
I use continuous high mode shooting, especially when the bird is in flight, because I feel that gives me a higher probability of nailing that perfect shot for myself. The camera's capable of shooting lots of frames per second, so I try to push the camera to its optimum use.
So my next question is, what's your white balance setting?
I usually use automatic white balance or let the camera choose.
So that would indicate that you're probably shooting RAW files, right?
Yes.
So if you have any white balance issues at all, you'll just go ahead and fix that in post-process?
I do, yeah.
So what autofocus selection mode are you using most of the time?
One spot focus.
So what you're doing is you're basically going to predetermine where you want the bird to be in your frame, and then you point your camera until the bird falls behind your focus point?
That's correct, yeah.
What about your autofocus mode? Are you using single shot or AI?
I'm using AI because the subject often moves. I can track it and stay on it.
Okay, so basically you're increasing the likelihood of getting focus as the bird moves around and closes distance or increases its distance, right?
That's correct, yes.
It's my understanding that a lot of bird shooters like to use back button focus, where they're untethering the focus from the shutter and the metering. Is that the way you like to shoot too?
I do use back button focus because it gives me an edge on speed.
Why is that?
Because if you back button focus first, you've already achieved the focus and then you just press the shutter. Whereas ordinarily, as you press the shutter, it then finds focus, then fires the picture.
I think that's it on the settings, right? You're shooting in manual mode. We know your f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO settings. You're shooting continuous shutter with AI focus, and your back button focusing. Do you have any other words of wisdom for those who really want to get into bird photography?
It's a passion, bird photography. I mean, the more you can learn about the subject that you're photographing, the better your pictures will be.
Yeah, I think your comments previously about being patient is really important because I've been out there a couple of times since we last talked, and you really need to hunker down and just wait for them to show up in that perfect spot. And then you still have to practice everything else to get it right.
You do. You need a great deal of patience and look at other people's photographs, study them, see what you like about them, and try and mimic it in your photographs.
I think over and over again, it really comes down to the person behind the camera and not the camera itself. Although the settings are really helpful in this situation because you're shooting moving objects, and it's a little bit of a technical thing that we're doing. But without the research, the practice, and the patience, I don't think you'll get very far.
No, the more you know about the subject, the better your photographs will become.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining me again. I think that pretty much sums it up, unless you have some ideas on what else we can talk about.
It'd be quite nice to talk about the country code, how to behave in nature when you're observing animals and birds.
I had no idea there was a code other than not littering, so I guess I'll try to behave until our next talk. Okay, enjoy your gloomy weather, and I'll call you in the spring.
Thank you.